Hello, welcome. It is terrific to have you with us this time. Our first guest today is often referred to as the District of Columbia's warrior on the Hill. Democrat Eleanor Holmes Norton was first elected in the early 1990s. She's been in office ever since. And more importantly, she probably holds the distinction as the person who has had the most appearances on News Talk of any single guest. I say probably because we've never done the math. We've never done the tally, but I'll bet it's true nonetheless, and I know how much that means to you, Congresswoman
Norton.
A great
deal. Well, that's probably because I've been here longer than the rest. And so have you. For 12 years.
You're a compelling guest who gives us the opportunity to talk about federal stuff and local stuff and that place where the two meet, which is often.
Often, too often, actually.
It is, and much of our conversation today will sort of be in that overlapping ground. So, looking forward to conversation with Congresswoman Norton. Looking forward to taking your calls at our number 703-387-1020. Let's jump right into it. I'm fascinated by the impasse between the House and the Senate on funding for a vital federal agency. Not to say there aren't vital federal agencies, but heaven, the Department of Homeland Security would seem an unusual agency that you would fund all the rest of the government for a year, which they did through the omnibus, leave this one with temporary funding, and now we're approaching an abyss because of the dispute over immigration.
And who would have thunk it? I mean, after what we've gone through and threatened close downs, who always gets blamed because who always does not want to compromise, and their names will go unsaid, are doing the same thing, particularly the House Republicans. Bruce, technically there are 15 days. There are really 4 legislative days until we close down the department that has to do with ISIL, that has to do with terrorism, that has to do with emergencies, disasters in our country. And of course, you will be told, well, of course, they'll keep working without pay. Some of them will be furloughed. I'm here to tell you how. And the House looks like it doesn't want to budge. They may have an out because of this suit, this kind of crazy decision by a court for a temporary injunction that I assure you will be overturned, but it does give an out for people looking for a way to get out of that corner.
Is it political cover? Is it an opportunity to say, we believe the president was wrong, and we're encouraged by the action of the court, therefore we'll fund the Department of Homeland Security until this thing gets resolved legally, because 26 states have moved on the White House. A judge has said there's enough there at least to hit the pause button. Political cover?
Political cover. The suit is the judges. This is a notoriously anti-immigration judge, and he treats an executive order as if it were it comes from an agency, and requires it to go through 60 days of review and comment. Well, actually, it doesn't happen in an executive order because the president is not a federal agency. But leave it there for a moment. If you are Boehner, Speaker Boehner, you are caught in a corner. You don't know how to get out of it. And let me tell you the corner he's caught in. Even McConnell says, get us out of this corner. You knew when you passed this bill that we could not get 60 votes in the Senate to overturn everything that the president has done on immigration. So let's try to get this done. And Boehner now has an out with the court saying it temporarily is halted, with the president saying he's going to appeal. So if he has any sense whatsoever, instead of letting perhaps the second most important department in the government shut down, he will take that cover and be done with it.
I mentioned at the outset how fascinating this is just to observe as a political theater. I hate to use that term because the stakes are high, because the agencies are so important. But you can't help but flash back to the day after the big Republican win in November when Senator McConnell, now Senate Majority Leader McConnell, was in his home state and he spoke to reporters. He clearly felt very good about the outcome because it was a historically good night, a fantastic night for Republicans. And he understood pretty quickly, as a savvy political guy, that with increased power comes
in both houses.
In both houses, and a president is heading into his final 2 years, that the obligation to make the trains run on time would increase. And he seemed to get that. He said, forget shutdowns. We're going to govern, I'm going to paraphrase now, we're going to govern like grown-ups. And yet here they are with, as you indicate, 4 working days left because they've chosen to go home rather than stay in town. 4 days to resolve this.
Or at least the leaders should be here talking about compromise. You would want the optics to show that there are some members here trying to reach a compromise. Nobody's here but me, Bruce, and that is the problem. Now, maybe they're on the phone, maybe they're having conference calls, but if so, they're not telling the press, and they're not telling us. And what are they doing? They're sending the message that even when you give us the power to govern, even when you give us the House and Senate, we're not going to govern we're not going to do any different than when we did not have both houses of Congress. Thank you for preparing us for 2016.
Is it possible that this judge's order, he's sort of hit the pause button, he hasn't thrown it out, as I understand it?
No rule on the merits, because he really has nothing to rule on, frankly, but go ahead.
What if there's something there? What if he's on to something? What if the president has taken this farther than legally he should or can?
Well, this judge really thinks that, and his prior rulings show that. He's going to have to show that an executive order, which does not make law, but simply sets priorities on where prosecutions will be brought, is in fact unconstitutional. And he won't be able to show it because the record already shows that in setting priorities on immigration up until now, the president has done it one by one, and some of the people didn't make it and they had to go home. So the record is clear. This is a judge, by the way, who shows that not all judges are objective.
Some are calling this amnesty for the group that gets some level of shielding or protection.
That's not much protection. If that's what you call the president's immigration order, these are people who get the right to essentially have driver's licenses and to work and not much more.
What about agency workers who are deemed essential? Are they being told you must work for free? You must find money from wherever to pay your bill?
That is it. We will pay you not one dime during that time. Now, what they did the last shutdown, they were blamed so heavily for it that afterwards they did give people the pay that they lost. But there is no promise of that, and they certainly haven't promised it.
Meaning the best case scenario is you have to dig into savings or find money out of the blue on short notice to pay essential bills.
Best case scenario, that will happen. If we don't reach a compromise with 4 days left after they get back here, and everybody's gone now, as I said, Bruce, except me. I'm here, but by myself.
Do you find that outrageous?
Totally so, and I don't think anybody is blaming anyone but the Republicans. They know they're being blamed, and they're writing it out. And Bruce, it's important to indicate to your listeners and your viewers why they're writing it out. The Republicans have put themselves in a box. The box is they're in 75% white districts with few blacks, Hispanics, with women who we only them, and they're totally unrepresentative of the country, so they're afraid to make decisions that you would expect for the entire country. They make them for a very narrow slice.
Mayor Muriel Bowser was here yesterday, and she said that Congress has put the city in a box on marijuana legalization. How do you see Initiative 71 and federal law, the apparent conflict between the two, being resolved?
Well, Bruce, as you may remember, we found a loophole in the language that was used to keep the district from going forward at all. So that means, in my view, and the lawyers in the district have agreed, the district's law can go into effect, and sometime in this month, in the end of this month, will go into effect. What the Mayor Bowser was trying to do was trying not to leave us in the position where you can possess marijuana, but you can't buy it. So you've got to get people out of that, go into the illegal market to possess it so that you can grow it. And it's only 2 ounces. This is the most restrictive marijuana law in the country. So whatever happens, the best case scenario out of that is you will be able to possess it, and that's what she means, possess it only. Now, what will they try to do? They may try to overturn even that the next time. But until now, that law is going to go into effect, and the reason I say so is the chair of the committee, Jason Chaffetz, says he not only supports home rule, but he will not put in a disapproval resolution. So if it is to be overturned, it would probably have to be in the appropriation period, and that is some months off.
Were council leaders overcautious in deciding not to hold a hearing? That the process of holding a hearing, because there are arguably supporting regulations that need to come to undergird the initiative that voters approved, and the feds are saying you can't spend money. You may not spend your own money in furtherance of enactment. Is flipping on the light switch in a hearing room, is having staff prepare materials, is any of that, is all of it in violation of federal law?
The district has conceded that it can't, quote, enact anything further. Now, you can argue that a hearing is in furtherance of enacting, in this case, the buying and selling of marijuana, which is what that hearing was to be about. So their own lawyers, including the new Attorney General Racine, said that could be construed very likely as a step toward enactment and advised against it. But they did something very wise. They had a round table. And you can have a round table, which is technically not a step toward enactment because it's not a hearing.
Let me offer this helpful suggestion. Hold the hearing, develop the regulations that the initiative that clearly are required, you know, just logically for the thing to move forward, and signal to the federal government and the rest of the world that D.C. is going to be full citizens. Colorado's doing it, Washington's doing it. The federal government's not moved on these states that have weed tourism, for heaven's sakes. What D.C. is doing is less than that.
And the federal government wouldn't move on us. I think you'd have to look at who would, who would incur penalties.
Claim the moment.
It's easy for you to say, and it's easy for me to say. There would be violations of federal law. I do not believe that anybody would move against them, but I don't believe that, given the position that the district is already in, that it is telling the Congress that it's moving ahead despite the congressional majority interpretation that it can't, that it didn't want to pile on and say, we're going to do things clearly no would be illegal under federal law, and that federal law being what the Congress has said, not what the President of the United States has passed.
You don't see it as almost like a gift in an odd way from a civil rights, in terms of the broader civil rights push for the District of Columbia. You don't see this opportunity as really representing a gift, a moment to seize?
No, it is a moment, but it's a moment that in seizing it you'd have to look first at the penalties and at who would pay them. Would it be the mayor? Would it be some lowly civil servant who carried out the order? And those are the kinds of considerations that are on the table. Talking with
Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton. A break here. Back, though, with much more News Talk right after this. Welcome back to News Talk, 16 after the hour. At the bottom of the hour, Washington Post reporter David Nakamura joins us to talk about the ruling that puts on hold for now the White House action on immigration, which we've been discussing here. Back now to our conversation with and your phone calls for Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton. Our number is 703-387-1020. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion for Congresswoman Norton. And by the way, you have two events coming up that I think will be of interest to the people listening, and we'll describe and provide information about those events. So stick around for that. The number on the screen. Hope you'll join the conversation. Again, our number here, 703-387-1020. To the phones, your questions and comments in the moments ahead. Do you expect federal workers to get a pay raise?
1%. Though a number of us are sponsors and co-sponsors of a bill, Representative Connolly is chief sponsor, for a 3.9% raise, which would not begin to make up for what the sequester and the cuts have done to federal workers. Bruce, what we're finding is that, yes, they can recruit federal workers, but they recruit them, train them, and then they're off. into the private sector. So we're having a hard time keeping federal workers right where we need them. It's gotten to that point, and you can understand why, given what they've gone through. So this 3.9% raise, you would think, is minimally what, at this point, with the economy doing so well, generally, with unemployment low, it would be time to finally reward the federal workers who have suffered more than any group of workers.
And as you say, there's a competition for the best.
There is. And especially in fields, and these young workers are all into social media and .com and all of that stuff that we need in the federal government. So this is not good to keep it at such a low rate of increase when you're beginning to see increases in the private sector now. And you're beginning to see much more hiring in the private sector.
Is the region's congressional delegation united on this?
So far as I know, they're united. I'm not sure if there's one Republican in the region. I don't know if she has joined us yet in asking for a raise. She has many federal workers, though.
Would that be helpful? Would that be particularly helpful given who? It
would be very helpful, and she is in a swing district, and I hope she remembers that.
Talk about the president's request, if you would, for war power authorization against ISIL. Their barbaric actions we're all aware of, and their sort of geographical moves are quite troubling, quite disturbing.
They are. You know, the recent moves against the Jordanian pilot who was burned alive, and now we understand, not confirmed yet, more people may be burned alive. The beheadings of Egyptian Coptic Christians recently has finally brought the Middle East itself into the war. What bothers me, Bruce, is this is another war in the Middle East, yet again, led by, guess who? The United States of America, which is not particularly, at this moment at least, endangered from ISIL. What happened to the people there? We need ground troops? Why should they come from the United States? I'm going to, at the time that this bill comes before the floor, submit a privileged resolution. A privileged resolution must be honored. And on that resolution, given the fact that district residents have participated in every war since the founding of the nation, I'm going to ask for a vote on this war. They can vote me down, but I'll be darned if I'm not going to ask for it. And the first thing that you're going to hear is a privileged resolution from Norton on a vote on this war this time.
To avoid a situation where without what you propose, some American citizens would be sent to battle without their elected officials having had the opportunity to weigh in.
Without the quid pro quo of a vote. And we've lost people in Iraq and Afghanistan. We lost in the 20th century wars disproportionate numbers of people compared to other parts of the country.
You and I need to talk about metro safety and the probe that's underway, but before I go any further, you've got two events. One
tonight.
One ties to the 50th anniversary. One is current today's headlines, and at the same time sort of has echoes to a major historical observance. We're 50 years on from Selma, from Woolworth, lunch counter, sit-in, from some amazing episodes in American history that also have echoes today. So there's an intergenerational discussion taking place.
There is, and one of the icons of that period, Julian Bond, who was in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee with me, and I will have a conversation at Howard University Business School this evening with two young people, leaders from Howard, who have been engaged in the demonstrations against racial profiling. So it's really about the unfinished business of civil rights.
It's called Crossing the Bridge Together because we're 50 years on from Selma.
Precisely. I'll be going to Selma, by the way, in March.
And this is the information, 2600 6th Street Northwest, tonight 6 to 8 p.m. It's free, and your website has more information on this, norton.house.gov.
Thank you. Yes, indeed.
So it's an interesting time because there's generational contrast in some of the discussion we're hearing.
Generational similarity. I've not seen so many young people in the streets since the civil rights movement. And what brought them in the streets? Well, the shootings in Ferguson and New York City were the vehicle. But why were people of every race in the streets? It's because their peers, and most of them were young people, have been talking about racial profiling. That if a young man of color goes into the streets, just to go into the store, Trayvon Martin, he's likely to be stopped. If you're on the road, and we've been able to document this, indeed, I was able to get it. Shows you how change has to come from the bottom up, because people don't even know this. I went to the House floor during the appropriation period and got into a law that was passed in the omnibus that it is a violation of federal law to stop people because of their physical appearance on federal roads. Now that's law now. How will that affect what in fact happens? Really, it's what happens in the street that's going to affect it. That these young people who have been talking to one another about how their peers get stopped went into the streets, but there's been too little talk about what to do about it. And so Julian Bond, who by the way later went on to be the national chairman of the NAACP, has been in civil rights all his life, and I, from our SNCC days, will talk to two young people who were just like us, except they've got another issue that we didn't tackle.
Let's talk about the tax preparation fair, which I know draws a big crowd every year, and then we'll talk about the Metro Safety Probe that I know you were part of that hearing. You have an event at the convention center. This is an annual thing you do that draws a good crowd.
It is. Why should people who live in the District of Columbia, who have no vote but have to pay taxes, have to pay to get their refund? So we said, don't pay. Come Saturday, 10 to 12, certified IRS preparers, some of them from our neighborhoods, who will also be there until April 15th, but they will be there in a group to both teach you how to prepare your own and to prepare it for you. We also will have a financial services fair, and you'll get all kinds of information on mortgages, on credit counseling, and you can open an account in a credit union.
And the sooner you file, the sooner that refund check comes.
That's right. And unlike the commercial the commercial servers, we don't take part of your refund. It's all yours. Once you come Saturday, Convention Center, 10 to 12.
Before we run out of time.
Must be a D.C. resident.
Must be a D.C. resident, indeed. What are you focused on most about the Metro incident that killed a person in a tunnel? What concerned you most? What's your forward focus?
Two issues that I don't think you've discussed enough. One is the training doesn't take place real-time drills in the tunnel. So they have some training at Landover. But then people have smoke come in a tunnel and they've been inside a tunnel. So I want real-time exercises throughout the region. The other issue that bothers me is when we lost 9 people, it turns out that all of them from the District of Columbia in 2009, we learned that Metro or underground or service systems like that were the only ones that didn't have a no-fault report system. So Metro was supposed to adopt one. We learn now that people are afraid to, if there is a close call, report it to their supervisor. And that is one thing we've got to fix.
So do you envision some anonymous opportunity to report?
Oh, absolutely anonymous. And still people are afraid to report. And so the supervisor is not supposed to say who it was, and yet it does not happen. We had the union there. There was no denial by Metro that it is a problem. Those are two issues that I'm particularly interested in. If you don't have real-time exercises, then come a disaster, don't tell me you know what to do. And
there's a belief embedded in what you're saying is that people who are on the front lines know what the issues are. If we hear from them, we can be proactive rather than reactive.
Precisely. Because they participated in it. It's not the first time they've had to see smoke in a tunnel, for example.
Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton, Democrat, represents the district on Capitol Hill. Always great having you here. It's one more tally in that reference we made at the beginning. Probably the #1 guest of News Talk on all time. I know you wear that crown
proudly.
Very proudly.
Don't you see it?
Thank you for your time. Good to see you.
Always a pleasure, Bruce.
More